Morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1 hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. And tonight, this afternoon or this morning, we're going to be talking about social justice as Dr. Martin Donohoe, my guest, my repeat guest, is going to be talking about, and we'll be all over the place talking about social justice and what that really means. Thank you again for coming on.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah. We got a cheat sheet of prompting questions here that we may get to maybe about 1/10 of them because you're so full of stuff to talk about. And
Oh, yeah, there are a lot of people who think I'm full of it. I don't know what kind of stuff.
I knew that was a straight line for you. How are you feeling right now?
Pretty well, thanks.
Yeah,
And you?
I'm fine now. I can brag because this is my second day in 3 weeks where I'm back to normal health-wise.
Yeah, you were quite under the weather.
Yeah, I had a flu thing that went into my lungs, I had a pneumonia and all that kind of stuff. And I says, I better call Dr. Donohoe and see if he can fix me up overnight. But anyhow, I'm well now, but I'm fine
Great.
now. And so in the bio stuff, you've been on a number of times before, but why don't you tell the viewers a little more about who you are personally so they'll get an idea where you're coming from when you talk about social justice issues.
Sure, yeah, I am a mammal, a primate.
Really?
Homo sapiens.
One of those nights.
Good at bipedal gait and respiration.
All right.
No, I am a physician, and I practice internal medicine part-time, teach part-time, and manage the public health and social justice website, which houses a collection of probably 100 different open access PowerPoints on a variety of topics in social justice, from corporations to obesity, smoking, gun violence, war, environmental degradation, women's rights, and various aspects of our healthcare system. And I recently published the Public Health and Social Justice Reader through Josie Bass Wiley, which is available through my website. Other than that, I am delighted to be here. I have a wonderful family. I have my mom lives in the area. My father, who's my hero, passed away a few decades ago. And I have 2 brothers and 3 nephews and a wonderful niece that I just love spending time with.
Now, repeat the name of that website again, a little slower.
Public Health and Social Justice, or the easy way to get there is just phsj.org, or you can Google me, and I'm not the Irish fiddler, or I should say accordion player, nor am I the recently deceased septuagenarian from Boston. So it's the other Martin Donohoe, and you'll find me.
You'll find a lot of interesting stuff there, I'm sure. Yeah, and you're single.
I am.
You hear that, folks? All right, now, do you have any heroes, persons from the past that you look up to or admire, other than your dad, or anybody alive today that you particularly admire or look up to?
Well, I'd have to say my mom and my whole family. I have a very close family, and growing up with 2 brothers who were not only smarter than I am, but
that's impossible.
They are, but have very deep hearts and are very good men and good parents to their children and really role models for me. And of course, my mother too has been a huge source of support for many years. In terms of people in the academic and activist world, Howard Zinn opened my eyes to the fact that what I learned about American history in high school and in college was a very sanitized version of what happened. Noam Chomsky, who opened my eyes to progressive politics and a progressive worldview. Carl Sagan, who amazed me with the wonders of astronomy and taught me how we as humans are just so utterly insignificant, and yet the planet that we live on, that's revolving at 1,000 miles per hour on its axis and hurling through the Milky Way galaxy, is so tiny, so precious, and is basically all that we've got. And the problems that we face today are so enormous that society needs to get together, and instead of building on greed and self-interest, needs to band together and say, we've got major problems facing the planet, and unless we do something soon, I and my students are going to be the doctors that carry us through our extinction.
So we need to do something about the conditions going on now on planet Earth. The we being who? The whole population of the Earth, or the U.S. particularly, or what?
Well, both. I think the U.S. has squandered the opportunity to play a significant leadership role in the world. We are the richest country in the world, and we only have 6.3% of the population, and yet we have 50% of the world's wealth. So with wealth, I say, comes great responsibility. And instead we squandered it through military ventures, which have made us hated throughout much of the world and have done nothing but send soldiers back in flag-draped coffins. We've promoted corporate selfish ideology above a ideology of love and of justice and of serving your fellow man. And we suffer from affluenza. We are responsible for a large portion of the world's energy use, about 25% of the world's energy use.
But isn't America promoting democracy around the world?
Oh, that's what I was taught in high school. No, unfortunately, if you look at the military ventures that the U.S. has undertaken over the last 100 years and ask yourself, which of those countries that we've invaded now has a stable democracy? The answer is zero. And today we have over 700 military bases in foreign countries, and our military budget is larger than the next 5 countries combined. We have the largest military budget in the world far and away, and we're also the largest arms supplier to the rest of the world. And many of those arms are not only planes and drones and missiles, but also small arms that make their way into the hands of rebel armies and vicious dictators in sub-Saharan Africa, where they are used in civil wars. So I would like to think that America was holding to the wonderful ideals that were set out in the Constitution, which is an amazing document. But unfortunately, we haven't lived up to those ideals.
So then it sounds like the argument that some people make that America is an empire. Do you think America is an empire?
Yes. And like all great empires, I think we're destroying ourselves from within. And we're squandering resources that could be spent to better humanity, not just throughout the world, but to better our own citizens. It's funny, Don, there is a misconception among the American public that we spend an enormous amount of money on foreign aid. In fact, if you ask citizens, they think it's about 25% of our gross domestic product is spent on foreign aid, when in fact, really, it's only about 1%. And of that money, a third of it goes to food, a third of it goes to education and healthcare, and a third of it goes to military ventures above and beyond what we're already spending to support other governments' militaries. And much of the money that goes to things like food and education and healthcare actually benefits U.S. corporations. So if you look at the U.S. in terms of foreign aid, we're certainly number 1 in terms of dollars, but we're number 21 as a percentage of our gross domestic product and what we provide to the rest of the world.
So we don't provide much foreign aid in terms of percentage of our GDP or our income as a nation.
Correct.
Wow. That's mind-boggling. I can't think of that. Anyhow, so is America a just society today in summary?
I don't think so. We have the largest wealth disparity of any Western nation. And today, 1% of the population in America owns 50% of the wealth. And
That's hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah, so the bottom 90% just owns 30% of the wealth. So you're talking about a difference between rich and poor, between white and people of color. You're talking about a country with an incredibly abysmal educational system.
That's a pretty strong term, abysmal educational
Well, when you
system.
compare us to other countries in Western Europe, in Southeast Asia, our graduation rates from high school have lagged behind. It's about 65% today of students will graduate from high school, which is what it was back in the 1960s. Our schools are crumbling and suffer from decaying infrastructure, and a quarter of high schools in the U.S. do not have a library.
Why is that, those things you just mentioned? Why is that in America?
Well, I think it's partly the decisions that we make as a society. We are a representative democracy, and so we ideally are voting for those candidates who represent our values. And it's easy to profess that we value children and that we value education, whereas the reality is those whom we elect to office have become so beholden to corporate interests and corporate money that they put corporate interests against the interests of the people.
So is what you said accurate? From what you're saying now, you said we elect those people to office who are running our country. That doesn't make sense. If we elect them to office and they're passing laws and running our country as though we're unimportant.
Well, in a sense, that's true. And I think part of it is the two-party system. So progressives are often forced to go into the voting booth, hold their nose, and choose between the lesser of two evils, or as others have said, the evil of two lessers. And it saddens me because I run into a number of progressives who say, boy, I really would like to see single-payer health care. I really would like to see more money spent on education. I would like to see us eliminate some of the racial disparities in this country in terms of outcomes in health care. I want a candidate who will do that for me. I want a candidate who will prioritize green energy and building an energy policy for the 21st century. There are candidates who support that platform. They come from the Green Party and other progressive parties, but people don't vote for them because they're afraid that that would be throwing away their vote, and that by taking a vote away from someone who is a Democrat, they'd be giving a vote to a Republican. Now, I think there are ways to change this system.
A two-party system? You said we have a two-party system a few minutes ago.
Well,
is that true?
I could say really it's a one-party system.
Oh?
Because there's not a huge difference, as you know well, between the two parties in this country. There are some minor differences.
So how do we get an alternative to these two branches of the same party? It's the party of the moneyed class.
It is the party of the moneyed class. And there are some differences on things like women's rights and access to contraception that are certainly important, and I don't want to minimize, and hopefully we can come back to the status of women in the United States.
Sure.
But one way of doing that would be to have, say, instant runoff voting. And the way that works is you have, say, 4 candidates on the ballot. And you have the Republican, the Democrat, and let's go back to the election where Bush was running against Gore, was running against Nader. And let's imagine a 4th candidate from the John Birch Society who's ultra-conservative. So say I wanted to vote for Nader, but I was afraid that I'd be throwing away a vote for Gore and I'd put Bush into office. What I could do is I would rank the candidates, Nader number 1, Gore number 2, Bush number 3, John Bircher number 4, and the way the ballots would be counted is such that they would go through, and whoever got the top 3 would stay in the pool. The last person would drop out, and everyone who voted for that person would get their second choice. And then they'd cycle the ballots through again, and they'd cycle the ballots through again. And so the outcome would still probably be similar, but at least it would show those in office that there are a significant percentage of people who have the kinds of values that progressives promulgate. And there is one other way of doing this too, and it's what's called proportional representation. And what that means is
That exists in Britain now, doesn't it?
it exists in a number
Parliamentary
of
system.
countries, a number of different countries. And basically, say you have 15% of the population who belong to the Green Party, 40% Democrats, 40% Republicans, 15% John Birchers, then 15% of the seats would be allocated to Green Party, 15% to John Birchers. And you would require our legislators to actually, for one thing, get down to business and get something actually done.
Oh, really?
But they would have to form coalitions, and they would have to take into account the values of most Americans. And frankly, it's funny because when I talk to people, I don't think that they're really all the time aware of what's going on in Washington. And that's not because they're uneducated or because they're not smart. It's because keeping up on these issues can really be a full-time job. And more. And you require watchdog groups and the media to inform you. But with media consolidation, if you go back to 1980, there were about 80 different media companies that controlled newspapers, publishing, TV. Now you're down to 5. And with this consolidation comes large corporations who have heavy investments in unclean energy sources, in banks, in some of those who have brought about the impending downfall of our society. And they're going to try to maintain their profitability by sending a message through the news media that keeps their self-interest going. Because the reason for corporations' existence and basically their responsibility to their shareholders is they have to make money. So this is not necessarily a bunch of people going wah-ha-ha-ha-ha in back rooms. I'm sure there are a few of those. But this is their responsibility to their shareholder to make money. And there's sort of an amorality to that.
It's been suggested that there's really a 4th branch of government now. It's the media. Mm-hmm. They have that much power and that much importance. What do you think about that thought?
I think that's true. There was a recent study of reports on global warming that were shown on Fox News, and basically they found that it was well over 90% of them were non-factual, just basically didn't agree with basic science. Mm-hmm. And it's I think the most popular outlet by which people get their news today.
Yeah. You said a moment ago, you used a phrase that kind of triggered me here. What's going on in Washington? What is going on in Washington? What's the reality of what's going on in Washington today?
Well, a lot of obstructionism. And basically, I think the Republicans would like to see Obama out of office. And at every step, they've obstructed him in trying to get judges approved, federal judges approved, in trying to get regulations passed that are mandated by law, and in trying to get basic legislation passed. How many times do we have to go over the fiscal cliff and come down to the last minute where a measure is passed that's a stopgap spending measure that gets us 2 months more of time, 2 months more of time? I'd like to see Congress actually tackle some of the major issues that are confronting us.
Why are they obstructing Obama this strongly, this powerfully? Why is that?
I think they want him to fail, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a big fan of Obama. I think that he's done some things that are good, and I certainly laud his speaking out on behalf of the rights of gays, and I wish he would do more on that front. I appreciate his stance on many issues relevant to reproductive access for women. Again, I wish he'd do more on that front. But I think he's basically a very militaristic president. He's supporting a policy with drones that violates international human rights law and allows him to kill with impunity Americans without trial, and broke his promise to close Guantanamo. So I'm not a fan of him either, but I think the Republicans would like to see him fail and get back in office and pass tax policies that would further benefit the rich, And part of it is just sort of a simple lust for power.
Okay.
The
So,
Democrats aren't doing much either, though.
how do corporations play into the unjust society here in the U.S. that we're talking about? I think we're talking about so much of American society today is unjust. And how do U.S. corporations play into that?
I think that they're intimately involved in that, and it goes back to their raison d'etre of making money for their shareholders. They spend a huge amount of money to influence government. There are 13,000 lobbyists in D.C. today. And if you were to go back to, say, just the 2010 election and look at how much money was spent by corporate interests, you're talking about $3.5 billion. And by comparison, all single-issue ideological groups, so women's rights, gay rights, gun rights, church groups, feed the homeless groups, 75 million. So right-wing, left-wing, those single-issue ideological groups were outspent 3.5 billion to 75 million. Money talks.
Corporations are making money. Don't they get enough money?
Well, how much is enough money? It's interesting because it's almost the expectation that for a country and an economy to be healthy, it has to grow. And when you think about what humans really want and need, I think what most of us want is peace in the world. I think we want to fall in love and have a partner, and many of us raise children and spend time with our families and sit in front of the fire and read and walk out in the forest and be able to breathe clean air and drink clean water. But why do we need more? Why do we need more stuff? Why is the success of a country or its economy based on how much it grows? Really, it should be based on how people's basic needs are met and how happy they are.
Then why is that, what you're saying?
Because I think the corporate philosophy basically forces us to live like roaches. And it's trumped some of our better instincts of love for our fellow man, and it feeds into our competitive nature, which is not always helpful. It's funny to me. This brings up an example from the pharmaceutical industry. And the pharmaceutical industry, by the way, has donated more money to federal lobbying
Careful,
than any
you're
other
a physician, doctor.
Oh, no, I'm not biting the hand that feeds me. I take no money whatsoever from anybody, let alone pharmaceutical industries, who basically...
Sure.
Oh,
I'm pulling your leg.
yeah, you've got to be kidding. No, in fact, there's a wonderful group that works with the medical students called No Free Lunch, that supports medical students boycotting the drug company lunches that are often brought into hospitals, along with drug reps who will hand out papers that often promote off-label uses of drugs, which is illegal, but they do it. They do other things. They torture data sets.
I'm going to get you to get yourself in trouble yet. So
I am already in trouble. You know what my goal is? There's a book that I ran into in PALS. It was years ago. It was 100 academics that are ruining America. And I really want to get in there. I really want to get into that book. But anyhow, back to the pharmaceutical industry. So not only are they the largest lobbying group, but they've been fined more than almost anybody, except for others, say, in the defense industries. But the argument that's often made is unless it's profitable to make new drugs, that if you remove the profit motive, that there won't be any incentive to develop drugs. And I just stand back and I say, wait a minute. The chance to practice science and the art of discovery and work in a lab to alleviate human suffering. You can't tell me there's enough motivated people, there's not enough motivated people in the US or in the world who would love to spend their career doing that. I just don't buy it.
Well, again, you've said something here that triggers me again, and I think about uh, making a profit. That is not the issue. It isn't making a profit. It's never having enough profit. That's the problem.
Right.
And I had something else I was going to say, but I forgot.
Well, it's how the mega rich are living. You know, now they're not only buying super yachts, but my understanding is there are companies that are building submarines so that you can escape your super yacht when it's attacked by the masses.
You're kidding me.
So,
Yeah.
there's a wonderful weekly news feed that comes out. You can get on the listserv. It's called Too Much, basically TOO much, and it documents economic disparities, but it also talks about the lives of the uber rich, and they're often petulant complaints about what they can or can't do, and the principality that they own, or the atoll in the Pacific Islands that is suddenly subject to some sort of environmental degradation, some sort of environmental regulation, and they have petulant complaints. Anyhow, yeah.
Get your last blow into the pharmaceutical industry before we take a break, and we'll come back and talk about the other things that we need 4 more hours to cover in the next half of the show, okay? What else do you want to say about the pharmaceutical industry before we stop?
Stop hiding data. I think all data should be open to the public, and I think that to hold back data that affects human health is criminal, costs lives, and those who do it should be prosecuted for murder.
Okay, Mr. E, can we take a break?
It kind of makes me sad.
Okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don that you're watching is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like Dr. Martin Donohoe here, my friend, about who he is personally and what it is we've decided to talk about. And he's so full of stuff to talk about until we're bouncing all over the place, and I'm not sure if we're going to follow our cheat sheet at all. I'm having an awfully good time. But at break time, you mentioned about the future of science, as though that's critically important in our discussion here. You're concerned about the future of science. Say some more about that. What do you mean by that?
I am. I think it's a discouraging time for young people who want to go into science, because many of them will end up working for the Department of Defense or for military industrial contractors, and their jobs will involve secrecy where they can't even go home and speak with their spouse about what they're doing. Many will go to work for corporate entities where they're dealing with proprietary data that, again, they can't talk about and it's secret. And many will go to work for government agencies like the FDA or the EPA, where they're allowed to do science sometimes. We know the CDC was forced to stop working on gun violence for a while, but they're allowed to do science. But then when it's time to promulgate policy, it has to get filtered through political channels, and they're often forced to silence themselves, destroy memos. And science is all about openness. It's all about the joy of discovery, sharing that discovery, and bouncing ideas off of other scientists around the world so that we can progress for the benefit of humanity. So I think it's a discouraging environment today for young scientists.
So, is America living up to its promise today? Generally speaking, is America living up to its promise for the ordinary citizens, for ordinary people like you and I?
No.
All right. Is healthcare in the U.S., talk about healthcare in the U.S. compared to healthcare in the rest of the world.
Pretty bad.
So it isn't living up to its promise as far as caring for its citizenry.
In terms of how much we spend on it, which is well over $8,000 per person per year, and many European countries and elsewhere do it for half of that and have better outcomes, have higher longevity, lower infant mortality and maternal mortality, higher vaccination rates, basically better public health systems. Cuba does better than we do at a fraction of the
Cuba?
cost. Yeah.
Of course.
In fact, Cuba volunteered to send doctors to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina because they thought that the U.S. public health system couldn't handle it. And as you could see by the stories on TV, we weren't prepared for it.
Mm-hmm. Have you been to Cuba?
No.
You got to go.
So I hear.
I went last year, and I'm going again next year. Wonderful human beings. A little digression. I just had a wonderful time, wonderful time. But anyhow, back to what we were talking about. So America is not living up to its promise as far as caring for the health of its citizenry. And
I think the numbers show that too. There's 49 million people who are uninsured today, and that's going to drop to about 25 million under the Obama plan, which is basically a giveaway to the insurance companies. But still, that's going to leave about 25 million people who don't have health insurance. And each year, 51,000 people die in this country for want of health insurance. I mean, the situation's even more dismal in other parts of the world. Every 8 days, the same number of people die of starvation as died during the Hiroshima nuclear attack. That's every 8 days. And every hour, 7 women die of unsafe abortions in the developing world. So during this program, 7 women, many of them already mothers, are going to die needlessly.
what's going to happen for health care in the U.S.? Are we eventually going to have a single-payer health care system, health care for all, like Medicare for all?
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. The administrative costs are a fraction of what they are for getting health care through insurance companies, which are profit-driven. Their interest is, again, in making money, not in providing health to...
Don't the insurance companies provide a service for the average American that's worthwhile?
Right, but they do it very inefficiently. The overhead for insurance companies ranges from the best, about 15%, to the worst, about 30 to 35%, whereas the overhead for Medicare and Medicaid is 2 to 3%.
This is a free enterprise system. Aren't they allowed to make a profit?
Well, I guess you have to ask yourself, are there certain things that should be beyond profit? Certain things that are just good for not only humanity because they're the right thing to do, or if you're religious because they fall in line with most religious tenets, but because they create a stable nation. We would have a much more stable nation if we had a better educational system, if we had a healthy population, which leads to an active citizenry that can get involved in politics, that can move our nation forward.
But if you had all of those things that you just mentioned, and you were limiting the ability of the corporations to make a bigger profit, aren't you then denying the effectiveness and the desirability of capitalism?
Yes.
Are you some kind of a socialist?
You know, I don't know
You're
what I am.
You're probably an Al-Qaeda person, are you?
You know, I really don't know what I am. I believe in democracy. I believe in representative democracy. Mm-hmm. I am opposed to capitalism. I do believe that competition is necessary in some fields. I think it's helpful to have a healthy competition. But I think that unfortunately most governments devolve into a small cadre of individuals who end up lording it over the rest of society, whether it's communism, socialism, or even our so-called representative democracy. We're not. And democracy and capitalism don't have to mean the same thing.
You're talking about socialism, communism, and then you talk about democracy. It seems you're mixing apples and oranges here. You're talking about isms, capitalism, socialism, communism. That's a whole concept that can be discussed. But when you slip over and then talk about democracy, then you're implying that these other systems are not democratic, but only capitalism is democratic.
Oh, no. In fact, the opposite. I think that you can have a democracy without capitalism and without the excesses of capitalism. Capitalist societies are inherently unstable because wealth becomes increasingly concentrated among fewer and fewer individuals. The rest of the population is driven out of the middle class into the lower classes where they're struggling for survival, and ultimately they get angry and they get unhappy and revolution results.
Whoa, you're reminding me of the Middle East and North Africa and all those kinds of places, but we only have so much time now. Do you have a country in the world now that is more successful as far as taking care of its citizens across the board than the U.S. is?
Well, yeah, better outcomes in healthcare in, as I said, Cuba. But in terms of overall wellness, I think some of the northern European countries do a very good job of providing their citizens with great benefits. They have higher tax rates, which people accept as basically the dues that you pay to live in a stable, happy society. Now, they have very racially homogeneous populations. And so it's a different, there's a different sort of balance of power and history there. I mean, the U.S. has an abysmal history in terms of how we've treated African Americans, say, going back to the slave trade and even just the discovery of America. In fact, I have a quote that I'd like to read, if I may. This is when Columbus met the Arawaks in the Bahamas when he first came to the New World.
Natives Arawaks.
Right. And this was his journal entry. They brought us many things. They willingly traded everything they owned. They do not bear arms. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want.
How does a human being get to think that way? Is there something that genetic makeup? White Europeans think this way?
I think it's the same sort of dehumanization that is inculcated in soldiers, to treat the enemy as subhuman, as of a different species, as inferior, as deserving of punishment. Here's one more. This is Cecil Rhodes. You may know Cecil Rhodes.
Oh, Cecil Rhodes. Oh, yeah, cool. Never mind.
Uber capitalist, founder of the De Beers Mining Company of Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, benefactor of the Rhodes Scholarship. This is his quote describing conditions in sub-Saharan Africa. We must find new lands from which we can easily obtain raw materials and at the same time exploit the cheap slave labor that is available from the natives of the colonies. The colonies would also provide a dumping ground for the surplus goods created in our factories. This is exactly what's happening today. This is why we're sending much of our toxic waste, our asbestos-laden ships over to Bangladesh to be taken apart by school children who are melting them down and being exposed to lead fumes. And this is it. This is still going on today.
Well, let's change topics a little bit. You're depressing me.
Sorry.
Oh.
Well,
so,
what's your idea of the ideal form of government? And what do you think is a country that does it well?
if we must put a label on it, it would be some sort of a socialism, and there are some Western countries who are more socialistic in that regard than capitalistic. And I think their mean level of satisfaction with their existence or happiness or okayness is much higher than the average American citizen. I'm not sure there is an instrument that measures that in American citizens as, what is it, Bhutan or someplace, yeah.
The happiness index, exactly.
And I think part of the reason that Americans are going along with what's going on in our country and continuing the American empire is they figure they've got to go along with it in order to satisfy that fourth estate that really governs how we think and what we're about as human beings. We can do better. Which reminds me now, we were going to talk about women and how women are faring in America today. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, sure. In fact, before we bring it to America, I just like to say something about the state of them in the world.
Of course.
If women are legally, politically, and educationally marginalized throughout the world and in America. Now, certainly things are much better than in America than they are in countries where women are still subject to female genital cutting, to Sharia law, where they're stoned to death for adultery, where being a rape victim is actually a sign of opprobrium, where being a non-virgin can get you killed by your own family as a crime of honor. So certainly things aren't that bad in the United States. But worldwide, women do 67% of the world's work, and 2/3 of that is unpaid labor. Yet, they only earn 10% of the world's wages and have 10% of the world's capital wealth, and only own 1% of the world's property.
What are we going to do about that? Is there anything America can do about that? Or is it going to get in the way of the capitalist accumulation of more power and money?
I think the problem is that it's an issue of education. And the more years of education a woman has in the developing world, the longer she delays childbirth, the more of an opportunity she has to get a good job, have a good income, have a smaller family, participate in the political process. And not only do you need education, but you need access to the full complement of reproductive health care services, from a variety of forms of contraception to abortion on demand.
So education, the kind of education you're talking about, is that equivalent to the kind of education we have going on in America today, where people are going to the polls, those that do vote, go to the polls, and vote against their best interest?
Which many do.
Or those educated people. What do you mean by education?
I'd like to say that. I think you have to be careful, because I don't want to use terms like ignorant or uneducated about people, because I think most people in the U.S. want to learn. The problem is that we don't provide the funding and the environment to do so. So you hear statistics like 30% of high school students can't find the Pacific Ocean on a map. In fact, 10% can't find the United States on a map.
You're serious?
You can't make this up. And then among adults, 20% of adults in the U.S. don't know that an atomic bomb has ever been dropped, and don't realize that the Earth revolves around the sun. 50% do not believe in evolution, which is a fact, and think that humans and dinosaurs coexisted.
So does that speak to the effectiveness or the accuracy of the education process in America?
It does. And in fact, things are even worse for African Americans in this country. There's a wonderful study put out in the American Journal of Public Health in 2004, and it examined what would happen if we were to have equalized black-white mortality ratios, which are a function in part at least of education, which provides opportunity, which provides better jobs and so on, but also of many other factors. But if we were to have equalized black-white mortality ratios for the preceding decade, we would have saved 680,000 lives. Then what they did is they looked at all medical advances over the same decade, new drugs, new surgical techniques, new processes of care, and determined that those saved about 180,000 lives. So this is not to disparage scientific research or to say that it's unimportant, because certainly it is, but it's just to show the power of interventions to create a more egalitarian society and what power that would have to allow people to live longer, healthier lives. And education fits into that. African Americans have lower graduation rates. They live in areas where there's poorer schools. Granted, public schools are supposed to be the same from neighborhood to neighborhood, but the problem is that you live in a wealthy community, there's going to be the school board foundation, and the parents are going to chip in money, so you've really got today a separate and unequal educational system, even in the public schools.
So you think there's racism in America today?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's often more subtle. You get things like driving while black, being pulled over and being hassled by the cops because you're in a neighborhood where there's not a lot of African Americans. You see the same thing with Latinos. Most of the people who pick our crops come to this country not to steal jobs from America. In fact, they send most of the money they make back home to their families, where they'd rather be with their spouses and their kids. But they come here and they do backbreaking labor for a pittance with no health care. They're totally expendable and can be replaced by many others who are willing to do the same thing. And we treat them with disdain. We don't offer them any sort of health care except at safety net clinics. And we pass them on the street often without even looking at them or talking to them. And so it's direct and it's subtle.
Why is that?
To some degree, I think it's a sense of discomfort. It's a sense of they're the other. It's maybe a fear of looking inside ourselves and saying, wow, there's a lot of things that I'm benefiting from that other people have done that is costing them their health and their lives. And if you really sit down and think about that, just look at the way this country was built. Most of our infrastructure was built by slaves and by Chinese laborers and others. It would just overwhelm you with guilt. Probably.
Some suggest that the human animal needs to have other humans that he's better than or more respected than he or she is. I'm okay, you're not okay. So relatively speaking, if we're living in the same area and I'm better off financially and other ways too, then by definition, I've got to be okay because I'm better than you are in how it looks to the rest of the world out there. So maybe that plays underneath the entire picture of humans relating to humans, so that humans have to have somebody better than they are, or somebody to look down on.
But what is better?
Better is a perception. If I am given to believe that I'm only as okay as I can be better than somebody else in the eyes of the society and the culture, then I'm stuck. But if in some cultures today, the members of that culture are okay because they respect the equality of the other members of the culture. But I don't need to have somebody that I can look down on or be better than in order to be okay or to be somebody of some worth.
Yeah, and life is just so fleeting. And what do you want when you're on your deathbed and you think back and say, do you want to be saying I was better than this guy, I was more respected than this person? Or do you want to have just wonderful memories of time that you spent with loved ones and things that really don't cost money or don't cost a lot of money? They cost money in the sense that they require time. And so if you're working 2 or 3 jobs as a single mom, you're not going to have the ability to experience that. But why is it that those with the money and with the power have lost to some sense their humanity, and that they can't look forward and say, God, when I'm on my deathbed, I'm going to be thinking back and, wow, wasn't it great that Little League game I went to with my kid where he finally got a hit after 5 shutouts or something. It's not going to think back and go, wow, that was a wonderful takeover we did on that guy where we sealed the deal on the golf course and made an extra $1 million that year.
I wonder if the average Dane or Swede and their last thought before they take their last breath has the same sort of reflection that we're talking about now as the average American. I don't know if you've had any near-death experiences, but I've had a couple in my many, many years. And it's really strange. It's hard to talk about. It's like giving birth to a baby.
Mm-hmm.
I can't tell you what that's like because I'm not a woman. But hopefully there's something that overrides everything else that's going on in the mental process, where there's a sense of peace and the light or whatever is going on. And that human being ends up passing away from this life with a sense of peace. I guess there's no other word to describe it.
Is that what you felt in your near-death experiences?
Yeah. It's hard to put it into words, but it's a sense of experiencing rather than thinking. And I didn't want to get too personal in that regard and losing track of what we're talking about here. But let's see if we can cover 1 or 2 more other topics before we have to shut down.
Sure.
We were going to talk about drones. What do you think about America's use of drones?
I think it's disgraceful. I think the fact that the president has essentially said that he can kill Americans with impunity without the right to a trial by jury because they represent a threat in his mind to the U.S., and the fact that this has already happened is appalling. And I can tell you that if Bush was in office, the Democrats would be out in the streets with placards and signs protesting. And I'm appalled that people aren't raising more of a stink about this.
In that sense, then, how is Obama different than Hitler or Joe Stalin and his purges or Pol Pot?
Well, they were vastly more efficient in their killing. At least in terms of numbers. You're talking about in the Holocaust, 6 million Jews. You're talking about huge genocides. I think now the drones today, I think the death toll is something like about 3,500 individuals, of which, depending on which estimates you believe, of people who are just innocent, it ranged from 300 to 800, 900, 1,000.
So numbers make a difference.
Well,
because Obama hasn't killed that many, it means it's okay for him to kill the people he's
No,
killing?
it doesn't make it okay. It makes him different in the sense that the numbers are different. Just as someone who shoots point blank someone in the head is in some sense equivalent to Hitler in that he's taking a life without any compassion for another human being. But certainly not in as grandiose a style. But I think Obama's setting a very dangerous precedent because there's going to be another president in office in 4 years. And it might be someone with a very different philosophy about whom we can bomb. And on the international scene, it's basically saying to other countries, look, we as the United States can essentially invade and bomb and kill the citizens of any country that we want to. And if other countries start adopting that philosophy and that tactic, you're going to see drone attacks on New York City. And in fact, what scares the bejabbers out of me is when terrorists get drones and arm them. Then they don't even need the suicide bombers. They can just buy one of these drones that's this big and arm it with something. And you shudder to think about it. And I hope we're not ending the show on that.
We're going to end in a few minutes. Listen,
We're going to end on a happier note.
All the stuff we've been talking about so far, and we're winding down now. You got about half a minute or so to tell the viewers some message or some words you want to give to them, considering what's been going on so far in this hour.
Well, one message is just to say how much I admire you and what you do and how much I've learned from you in our time together. And it's so nice to have mentors who have been doing what you've been doing for as long. It gives me inspiration.
Thank you.
I guess I would say to those that are up and coming, get active, educate yourself, and get angry. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. The first job of a citizen is to speak up. Those are the words of Nobel Prize-winning writer Günter Grass. And I guess I'll end with an African proverb which goes, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try going to bed with a mosquito in your tent.
So I think I'll let it go at that. So it's close to time for us to stop visiting and get ready to say good night. Keep those pens and pencils handy because you may want to jot down something that we'll show you in the closing credits. I invite you to give us feedback, both positive and negative, about any aspect of the show. Now, I've got to tell you about some public service announcements. To get my local broadcast schedule, go to my website and click on present day activities. Next PSA we've got for you is, and we put the next one up there, I got to tell you about the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be worse off than they are right now, and they're really threatened right now by this present administration, the continuation of the Bush administration. Now, what else can I tell you about now? To get my shows broadcast by other stations, ask your local public access station in the city where you are to go to www.pegmedia.org and follow the instructions there so that they can broadcast my shows locally rather than on the internet or how you're seeing them right now. And to end corporate personhood, which you've got to do, go to www.movetoaman.org so that corporations cannot be considered persons with all the power and respect that humans have. Wow. Thanks for watching. And remember KFC? Yes, KFC. And not that KFC. Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind. Be friendly and be charitable to you too. And you. And you. And control room too. Thanks again for watching.